The Point with Greta Van Susteren. Once again, anti-aircraft fire lights the sky over Baghdad. And once again, a U.S. president warns Iraq to keep its promises.
We will continue to enforce the no-fly zones.
Tonight's Point, the airstrike against Iraq. Why Saddam Hussein is still in power. And why he's still a threat. And what could provoke a more serious showdown.
We're going to watch very carefully as to whether or not he develops weapons of mass destruction. And if we catch him doing so, we'll take the appropriate action.
The Point. Now from Washington, Greta Van Susteren.
It all looks and sounds so familiar. Is it partly our fault? If the West had gotten rid of Saddam Hussein 10 years ago, how much better off would the Middle East be by now? And if getting rid of him wasn't possible 10 years ago, what about now? Tonight's Flashpoint, the airstrike against Iraq. Here's the latest. The United States and Britain launched attacks today against 5 Iraqi military command and control centers near Baghdad. It happened about 1 p.m. Eastern Time. President Bush says the attack was a routine mission to enforce the no-fly zones over Iraq. The Pentagon calls the mission self-defense because Iraq has stepped up threats against aircraft patrolling the no-fly zones. British authorities say Iraqi attempts on Allied patrol planes this year already exceed the total for all of last year. Iraqi television says 1 woman was killed and other civilians were injured during the attacks near Baghdad. Iraqi President Saddam Hussein has issued a statement blaming the action on the United States and Israel. He says it's just a prelude on an Israeli attack on the Palestinians and the Arab world. President Bush says the U.S. is going to watch Saddam Hussein very carefully to see whether he's developing weapons of mass destruction. Mr. Bush adds if he's caught doing so, quote, we're going to take appropriate action. So 10 years after the Persian Gulf War, why is Saddam Hussein still a thorn for Washington? A decade ago, during Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, Wolf Blitzer was CNN's Pentagon correspondent. So I asked him to stick around tonight and give us some perspective. Wolf, first to you. Why, back in 1991, didn't the United States go in and kill Saddam Hussein?
The mission, Greta, that was carefully defined by the United States and its coalition partners was to liberate Kuwait. Once that mission was completed, President Bush at the time, the Defense Secretary Dick Cheney, Colin Powell, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Norman Schwarzkopf, they all recognized that the mission had succeeded. The mission was not necessarily to overthrow Saddam Hussein and take the coalition all the way to Baghdad. They sensed that that would result in a long-term struggle that they really had no stomach to engage in. Their mission was to liberate Kuwait. Once that was done, they thought mission was accomplished. They also felt that there would be an uprising within Iraq by the Shiites in the south, the Kurds in the north, and that eventually the Iraqi people themselves would get rid of Saddam Hussein. On that point, they clearly miscalculated.
Wolf, was there any dissension back at that time among the major players in the Gulf War?
There was no real dissension. The Arab coalition partners, the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, the Egyptians, the Syrians, they didn't want to see Iraq dismembered. They didn't want to see Iraq carved up into smaller pieces. So they were carefully determined to make sure that the U.S. didn't go all the way to Baghdad. They didn't want to see that happen as well. But within the Bush administration at that time, I don't remember any senior policy official saying to Defense Secretary Cheney or to Colin Powell or to President Bush, you know, this is a bad idea. Let's finish the job. Let's go all the way to Baghdad. There may have been some policy, there may have been some analysts within the administration, within the government, making that kind of argument, but they were relatively low level.
Is there any difference? You also, in addition to covering the Pentagon during the Bush presidency, you moved on to the White House during the Clinton presidency. Was there a change in policy into how to handle Iraq post-war between Bush and Clinton? Well,
originally, you remember President Clinton, during the transition, he was then President-elect Clinton, made some comments which were highly controversial, suggesting perhaps Saddam Hussein could change. Maybe he would become more responsible, if you will. That proved to be short-lived. Remember, there was intelligence that Saddam Hussein was engaged in a plot to try to assassinate President Bush when he visited Kuwait. Once the U.S. intelligence community confirmed that there was such a plot, the Clinton administration, President Clinton at that time, ordered airstrikes against Saddam Hussein very, very quickly. But there was some controversy at the beginning that President Clinton was not sophisticated enough in understanding Saddam Hussein, and there was a sense that Saddam Hussein was testing him in the process.
All right, let's shift from history and policy, and let's talk about Wolf Blitzer covering the war back in 1991. What was it like personally covering the war at the Pentagon?
Well, it was nonstop for months and months following the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, August 1st, 1990, until the end of the Gulf War, January and February of 91. I was relatively new to TV at that time, to TV journalism. I learned very quickly how to do a live shot, and I guess in the end it was just good, solid reporting that helped me and all of our CNN colleagues cover that war as thoroughly as we did. It's quite interesting that now some of the same names are still involved in today's airstrike. Colin Powell, Dick Cheney, Bush is involved, and of course Saddam Hussein is involved as well. And I guess at a much, much lower level, Wolf Blitzer is sort of involved 10 years later as well. I'm glad to still be around, Greta.
And indeed, so are we, Wolf. Thanks to CNN's Wolf Blitzer for sticking around tonight. Another veteran of the Persian Gulf War is Colin Powell. Back then, he was chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff. Now he's Secretary of State and has been planning a trip to the Middle East. Let's bring in our State Department correspondent, Andrea Koppel. Andrea, why is he going to the Middle East?
Well, he's going there because of a very important anniversary later this month, Greta, the 10th anniversary of the liberation of Kuwait on the 26th of the month. Colin Powell, of course, deeply involved in that event, kicking Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. But while he's there, Greta, he figured that it made sense for him to touch base with the United States' key Arab allies, also with Syria, to begin to kind of push that ball forward. He very much, the Bush administration, very much hoping to re-energize the existing UN sanctions against Iraq.
Andrea, why do they need to be re-energized, these economic sanctions?
Well, they need to be re-energized because right now they're in danger of, I don't want to necessarily say cracking, but certainly crumbling around the edges. Going back a number of years, you've been seeing pictures on Iraqi television of starving Iraqi children, people in the hospital. Today, of course, again, the pictures see of wounded Iraqis, all due to U.S.-UK airstrikes, so says the Iraqi government. And that really has resonated within the Arab world, especially among the Arab people who see that and say, you know, enough is enough. It's been going on for 10 years, and they're not thinking, as many in the Arab world, the leadership is, that Saddam Hussein may very well still have some sort of capability to manufacture weapons of mass destruction. That is the message that Colin Powell will be pushing when he goes there next week.
And Andrea, with that message, though, does the State Department, does the U.S. government think these economic sanctions have been working or are working?
They do think they've been working, but again, they haven't been enforced as well as they could be because some in the Arab world have let things get across the border. It's an extremely porous area around Iraq, and unless you have the support of Saddam's neighbors, things do manage to slip through the cracks. They've managed to work, Greta, in that they don't believe, that is, the United States does not believe that Saddam Hussein has chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. But having said that, there is certainly, there's much more support for Saddam Hussein in recent months following the Palestinian uprising. And the more that those pictures get out there of poor Iraqi people who don't have enough to eat and who don't have enough clothes, the better the chances of Saddam getting rid of those sanctions at some point in the near future.
All right, Andrea, stand by for a second because I want to show the viewers some video we're getting in now from Iraqi TV, which shows some of the effect. This is a dayside video showing some of the effect of the bombing in Iraq from the airstrikes, the joint airstrikes between the United States and Great Britain. Andrea, let me go back to you once more. Is there any sort of U.S. support for resistance, Iraqi resistance to Saddam Hussein?
Well, this is a new administration, and there are some within the Bush administration who think that the Iraqi opposition stand a fairly good chance, if they were armed, if they're given more money, to perhaps overthrow Saddam Hussein. And whether or not that's going to be a position that the administration itself takes up remains to be seen. It is certainly one of the options the Iraqi Opposition has been in town for the last couple of weeks, meeting with people in this building, meeting with people over at the Pentagon and the White House, making their pitch that they can do the job if only they get the support from the Bush administration.
All right, thanks to CNN State Department correspondent Andrea Koppel. In a minute, I'll assemble a panel of guests to discuss where U.S. policy on Saddam Hussein and Iraq may go from here. The Point returns in just a minute.
Welcome to America Online, new version 6.0. The easiest just got even easier.
You just plug it in and you go.
With 6.0, all the best features are even better.
You've got mail.
Customer service is always there to help.
Parental controls help safeguard our kids.
Nobody else has all these features.
It keeps me closer to my family and friends.
There's never been a better time to join.
6.0 is the best AOL ever.
America Online, new version 6.0. So easy to use, no wonder it's #1. Call 1-800-4ONLINE now.
Hi, to the Meadowlands, please.
Who is this? It's a Chris Berman. Chris Berman of the moon. Chris Berman! Overboard! No, that was not good. This next will be brilliant. Rumbling, bumbling, stumbling.
Want to get away?
Stumbling.
Now you can fly Southwest Airlines coast to coast for just $99 when you purchase by February 22nd.
You are now free to move about the country.
Today's mission, brainstorm ways to raid the bird feeder. How? Posted easel pads. They really stick to the wall. No tacks, no tape, no problems. So you can have a productive meeting and then do lunch. Posted self-stick easel pads.
5 years ago, 2 eager CEOs started their own companies. One encouraged his employees to read the Wall Street Journal to stay ahead of the competition. The other did not.
All right, let's keep working. Come on, Bill. 24.
Let's join them for their 5-year anniversaries and see what happened.
You guys are incredible. These past 5 years have been amazing.
Thanks for enduring the pay cuts and the loss of benefits.
But we've been even more successful than I could have hoped.
To 5 more years of this.
Look at you! Here we go!
Imagine what the Journal could do for you. It's now easier to get the Journal to help you. Get 8 weeks of the Wall Street Journal for just 37 cents a day. That's 50% off the regular rate. Call 800-255-8400. That's 800-255-8400. The Wall Street Journal. Adventures in Capitalism.
He Said, She Said, the guide to your entertainment weekend. Saturday mornings, 10:30 Eastern on CNN.
Sunday, the presidency of Ronald Reagan, the major events and the perspectives of those who led the Reagan Revolution, the Reagan years. Inside the White House, Sunday, 10 Eastern on CNN.
Welcome back to The Point. Why is Saddam Hussein still around, making trouble? My guests are Juliette Kayyem. She's the executive director of the program on domestic preparedness and terrorism at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. She's in our Boston bureau. And here in Washington is former State Department official Henri Barkey. Before joining the faculty of Lehigh University, he worked on U.S. policy in the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean. Also joining me here in Washington is Robert Gallucci, who's the dean of Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. He served in the U.S. State Department and with the United Nations Special Commission monitoring the disposal of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. Let me go first to you, Henri. First, why do we have this? What's the strategic reason for the no-fly zone?
Well, we have two no-fly zones. One is in the north, which protects the Kurdish population of Iraq. The Kurds rebelled after the Gulf War in 1991, and Saddam Hussein ruthlessly put down that rebellion, causing large numbers of refugees to go to Turkey and Iran. So that no-fly zone was established so that Saddam Hussein's helicopters and planes could not attack the Kurds in the north. The no-fly zone in the south, by contrast, has two purposes. The main purpose is to give adequate early warning to American forces in the Gulf if Saddam Hussein has any intention of moving south. If you recall, in 1990, when Saddam Hussein moved south, he moved rather quickly. He moved into Kuwait rather quickly, and there wasn't that much resistance from the Kuwaitis. And now the U.S. military would like to have enough warning time. The other reason is also to protect the Shia population of the south, which also rebelled after the Gulf War and was suppressed brutally by Saddam, except that there's a difference between the north and the south, and in that the Shia population is still under the Saddam's military control, whereas in the north the Kurds are not.
Bob, what do you make of today's airstrikes? Was that wise or unwise?
At this point, I have to say wise. It has been advertised as a continuation of a policy, as nothing new. I think if the briefing today was on the mark, then we heard that the threat to our aircraft that were monitoring the no-fly was increasing, and we really had no choice if we wanted to continue to fly and fly safely without casualties. The real question is, of course, what happens next and whether there's going to be any kind of new direction to policy, what Secretary Powell will do in the region, whether we can sustain a sanctions regime defined perhaps differently, and whether we can prevent Saddam from acquiring weapons of mass destruction and still manage an Arab reaction and a Russian reaction.
Julie, let me ask you a question that seems almost crude to ask, but why, should the U.S. kill Saddam Hussein? Should they have done it back in 1991?
When it was a different context, it was a time of war, but today, and generally legally it's a problem. We have a prohibition against assassination. Since 1977, President Ford wrote, with the endorsement of Congress, an executive order which prohibited our intelligence agencies, or actually any person employed by the United States, to assassinate leaders. And that didn't come out of nowhere. That was because of a long and sordid history of our attempts to assassinate leaders in Latin America, Eastern Europe, and communist leaders generally. And I think it's important that as a prohibition that we respect it. There's actually legislation on the Hill right now through the House Judiciary Committee to attempt to repeal the assassination ban. That will have broad implications and probably right now is a bad idea. I think it's addressed towards people like Hussein and Osama bin Laden. But secondly, we have to think of the policy reasons why we don't assassinate. First of all, if we assassinate someone like Hussein, do we know what's going to come in its place? I mean, we unleash a flurry of uncertainty that we will have to take credit for. And we're not quite sure in this case and in other cases what it means. Finally, what standards would we use if we start to permit assassination as a form of warfare or as a form of national security? Is it people we don't like a lot? What standards in terms of proof do we have to show that says that this guy's a grave danger to us or a grave danger to his neighbors? And so there's a lot of sound... Let me go to Bob on that question. Bob, the legislation that Juliet's talking about is legislation has been introduced by Congressman Bob Barr from the state of Georgia to repeal the anti-assassination. Do you think that would be a good idea to empower the United States to be able to assassinate leaders of other countries?
Catastrophic, ill-considered, a bad idea, and it should be defeated as quickly as possible as an idea at all in the American political tradition. That we should have to have an executive order is interesting. That we do have one is important, and we ought to keep an executive order and keep reissuing it and make sure that no government in the United States adopts assassination as a matter of policy.
All right, we take a quick break. My panel and I will be right back.
Our job? Helping people's feet.
I work on dirt, rock, steel, rebar.
This rebar is bouncy stuff.
I hate walking on rebar. My feet cramp up.
It's like a fire burning in your feet.
Our Dr. Scholl's Advantage Work insoles can help.
It's futuristic.
Our insole has the advanced force line energy return system, and it's clinically proven to relieve foot and lower back pain.
The insole's going to be taking the punishment and out my back.
They're designed to absorb constant pounding on hard surfaces.
Feels good, like my feet are getting held.
Like you're springing.
Now, can I drive the bulldozer?
No.
Treat yourself right at DrScholls.com.
You may know Delphi Automotive Systems is in your car.
Happy anniversary.
Honey?
But how would you like a glimpse of what we're developing for tomorrow?
Take a look at our communication systems, where we're bringing the internet, even email, into your next vehicle.
And our advanced vehicle dynamics will give drivers greater control. Have a nice evening.
Delphi Automotive Systems, driving tomorrow's technology.
Are you going to stay out here all night?
Computer, note to self. I think we should integrate the customers.
Osama Azuma just can't get technology off his mind. Which means his customers don't always have to have it on their minds. WorldCom, Generation D.
Your call will be answered by the next available operator. Please stand by.
Your service reps are overwhelmed with customer calls, faxes, and emails. Integrate the internet into your call center and go from providing customer support to creating customer delight. Discover all that's possible on the internet. Cisco Systems, empowering the internet generation.
Today's mission, brainstorm ways to raid the bird feeder. How? Post-it easel pads. They really stick to the wall. No tacks, no tape, no problems. So you can have a productive meeting and then do lunch. Post-it self-stick easel pads.
Welcome back to The Point. I'm talking about today's airstrikes against Iraq and the larger problem of what to do about Saddam Hussein. My guest, Juliette Kayyem of the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, former State Department official Henri Barkey, and former UNSCOM UNSCOM member Robert Gallucci. Let me go first to you, Henri. The whole issue of economic sanctions. We had airstrikes today. We have our Secretary of State going to the Middle East next week about economic sanctions. Are we really getting anywhere with economic sanctions?
There's a great deal of fatigue with economic sanctions in the region, primarily because sanctions are seen as hurting the Iraqi people. The fact of the matter is that Saddam can import as much as he wants from, can export as much as he wants and buy anything he wants with the oil revenues. But he doesn't do that, and he uses money selectively. The problem is not so much, the issue is not so much sanctions, it's what does Saddam do with the money. And everybody agrees that more than sanctions, what is important is control over the money. And make sure that Saddam uses the money not to buy arms and dual-use equipment, but spend it on things that the people in Iraq need, medicine and food.
Bob, what about weapons of mass destruction? What do we know that he has, or what does he have the capability to have?
First, beginning with the one we need to worry about most, nuclear weapons. The nuclear weapons capability, we think, has been pretty much dismantled.
You say pretty much.
Pretty much dismantled, but the problem really here is that we track capability to produce nuclear weapons in terms of fissile material production, and that is no longer a good way to track the capability. With the deterioration, the end of the Soviet Union, the possibility of fissile material from the former Soviet Union is a real one, and given that Iraq knows how to fabricate nuclear weapons, we've seen their nuclear weapons designs since 1991, we cannot be sure, really be sure, that Iraq does not have or is not proceeding with a nuclear weapons development program, so we have to be very concerned about that. Biological weapons are very hard in terms of monitoring a capability to produce them. They can be done on a very small scale. So while we don't know of a capability right now, it cannot be excluded. Chemical weapons are perhaps easier to track and of slightly less significance than biological or nuclear weapons. Ballistic missile capability is something we worry about, easier to track, not great at the moment. The issue is, of course, for the future, and if the resources are available to Saddam, if the sanctions regime is completely lifted, then the regeneration of those programs has to be a principal concern for our security and the security of Israel and the whole region.
Bob, today the President's administration said this was routine. You've just listed a number of terrifying forms of weapon. We had airstrikes today, obviously. Should we be alarmed? Is there a risk of escalation, or is this simply an effort to put him in his place tonight to protect us, or is there a risk something worse could be coming on the horizon very soon?
I take the administration at its word that this is a continuation of a policy that's existed. You could call it a containment policy. No one has ever found it very satisfying. The last administration didn't, and I don't suspect this one will either. They will be looking for other ways to put pressure on Saddam by regenerating and gaining support for a sanctions regime. And ultimately, they have to be on their watch. We have to be on our watch that the Iraqis do not develop the weapons of mass destruction once again.
Juliette, is the policy of the this president's administration and the previous one, is it working? Is this a good policy? Let me go to Juliette on that.
I actually think it's probably the best one we got right now. Unfortunately, the image we're getting of this policy is often the victimized and pained Iraqi citizens who are hurting from the sanctions. And I think Colin Powell's visit to the Middle East is going to give us a good opportunity to remind our moderate Arab countries why we're doing it and the benefits to them of enforcing the sanctions and restarting UN inspections. A country with weapons of mass destruction like Iraq could or might soon be is terrifying to its neighbors, not just because of the possibility that Hussein would use them, but that he might give them to terrorist groups or others who would use them in other parts of the world. So this is an opportunity for Powell to remind both us and our Arab allies, why we're doing this.
Henri, when you look at the map of the two no-fly zones and you recognize the fact that the strategy of the United States government has been one of economic sanctions, why not, if you want to strangle them economically, why not just put the no-fly zone over the entire country? Why do we give them even that much space to fly?
Well, the no-fly zones are not economic measures. The no-fly zones are essentially military measures. So if you extend the no-fly zone to all of the country, you will not make any change in the economic situation. The sanctions, are really the result. The problems that the sanctions are creating are because Saddam has managed to manipulate them. But they also are not very effective anymore. After 10 years, we've realized that they haven't made much of a change in Iraqi behavior. So the question is, we can keep the military sanctions, we can keep the control over the money, but should we maintain economic sanctions? Who wins?
And of course, that's the question that this new administration will have to struggle with, but that's all the time we have for this evening. My thanks to Juliette Kayyem, Henri Barkey, and Robert Gallucci. Let me know what you think. Send an email to askgreta@cnn.com. That's one word, Ask Greta. I'm Greta Van Susteren in Washington. Stay with CNN throughout the weekend for the latest development in the airstrike against Iraq.